It's a very moving story about a future society where you just can't have children without getting a license from the government. Its circumstances have really changed. Technology has increased to an extent that most normal work is performed by robots. And in this society, we are confronted with the idea of programming a child robot so that he is able to love.
Ready?
This is a seed idea.
I propose that we build a robot who can love.
Mommy!
Go anywhere but that way or they'll catch you.
No, Mommy, please!
We run now.
You're a machine.
I'm a boy. My name is Steven.
Well, my involvement in AI came about simply because my friend Stanley Kubrick told me a story that he was developing about artificial intelligence. And it was a story that was very close to his heart. For the first time in the 18 years I knew Stanley, he was taking me sort of into his creative confidence on a project. He never brought me into his confidence on Full Metal Jacket or on The Shining, but for some reason on AI, he felt that I was a little simpatico to that subject. Stanley began talking to me about it in the mid-1980s. And in the mid-1990s, he actually called me again. We had talked many, many times during that those 10 years. And then one day he said, I think I have a great idea. I produce it, you direct it. And I kind of took me back. I didn't quite understand what he meant by that. And I said, what, you mean you want me to direct the movie you were going to direct? And he said, yeah, I'll produce it for you to direct.
While Stanley was alive, he said, this is actually a film that should be directed by Steven Spielberg. He appreciated Steven's different talent very, very much, and he saw all his films.
Steven installed a fax machine in his closet at home, and he and Stanley faxed each other directly. Any notes about the script, any comments, you know, nothing went through me, or there were no copies in the office. Steven basically served as his own assistant for this project, and Stanley was the exact same way.
We actually spent 2 months going over all of his storyboards, almost 1,000 storyboards he had already done on the film, and a 90-page treatment that he had supervised based on the short story Super Toys Last All Summer Long by Brian Aldiss, and then the screen story by Ian Watson, which Stanley had pretty much worked on with Ian.
Tell me, what is love?
It was a great opportunity, and I wouldn't have responded in the positive if I hadn't really thought it was one of the nicest stories I had ever heard. I mean, the story that Stanley told me was a beautiful, contemporary, albeit future fairy tale.
I like your floor.
And I thought it had a gentle heart, and it was also had extreme kind of, you know, elasticity about the project. It went from the domestic, the gentle, a mother and a son, and the relationship between mothers and sons, to suddenly an odyssey, an adventure that takes you into the darkness of an unspecified future time when robots and man are at the brink of civil war. And then returns you to a dream, a wish that this robot child, David, makes at the very outset of our story.
Are you her?
And it was a story that I thought was a perfect story for Stanley. Stanley kept saying, this is the perfect story for you. We went back and forth like that until I finally just said, I think you should do it, Stanley, and I'll produce it for you if you'd like. And Stanley said, no, that's okay. If you don't want to direct it, I'll do it.
When Stanley passed away, his widow contacted Steven and basically said, you know, this film will never see the light of day unless you make it. And it was just like a gift had fallen in Steven's lap.
And I said yes, first because it was a wonderful story, and second because it was a way for me to honor Stanley.
And we basically, from that point forward, any other project went on the back burner, and we were all about making artificial intelligence.
You got it, cut.
And cut, great.
He was attracted to it because it embodied many of the things that he had explored with, obviously, E.T. and Close Encounters. But I think this, in many, many ways, takes Steven several more steps, because Stanley Kubrick is bringing something to this project. And Steven wanted to embrace that and pay homage to that. And so he took Stanley's contribution and then added that to his own. Once he found out that this might be a project he would do, it was a project that he had spent so much time thinking about, that to sit down with a writer and start talking about what he wanted that writer to do, he began to realize it might be better if he just tried to do it himself.
I've done a lot of writing that I haven't taken credit for in the intervening years between Close Encounters, Poltergeist, and now. I haven't stopped writing. I don't sit down and do entire screenplays, but I do a lot of collaborative, the stuff that directors often do in close associations with certain writers. Don't do it all the time, but I've been very involved in writing, or at least in collaborating with writers on most of my directed films. So this wasn't unusual for me to write it, but the story was unusual and so personal to Stanley that I thought it would lose Stanley's personal ideals if I had to recommunicate his ideas through me to yet another party. And I just thought it would, you know, kind of preserve the purity of what Stanley wanted to achieve and the story he wanted to tell if I just bit the bullet and wrote it myself.
I read Steven's script and I was completely enthusiastic about it, because he did one thing. He used the script as it was, in principle, without really changing it drastically. But he made hundreds of changes, nevertheless, and really improved it. And Stanley would have loved it. The film script that I read by Steven is very, very much in his spirit. That gave me great joy.
There were enormous challenges facing this project because this is a journey, and because it's a fairy tale, and because it takes place in the future. Nothing really exists, so everything had to be designed and fabricated and invented by Steven. And then the process of communicating that to all these different people in all these different departments is really what the challenge of producing is all about.
Very nice.
Fairy tale.
I love you.
Action, Francis. I sort of learned a long time ago to be careful about detailing what motivates me to tell a story as if it's some tremendous thought process that takes years to figure out first emotionally and internally, and then to be able to turn around and tell you the story that I worked so hard to figure out whether I wanted to tell at all. And I realized that it's all the decisions I make about the stories I tell are intuitive decisions. I either spark their story or I don't. And in this case, when Stanley first told me about AI and let me read The Treatment in 1984, I immediately said to Stanley, "This is the best story you've ever had to tell." And I felt that in 1984. And I think that gave Stanley encouragement to continue to pursue the project even further.
I was.
I wish he had lived to tell this story. I would much rather have seen this movie from Stanley Kubrick. But when I had the opportunity to make the picture, I thought I would satisfy my own urge to simply want to tell a good story, and such as this is. And at the same time, to be able to say, this is for my pal Stanley Kubrick.
Goodbye, Joe.
Goodbye, David.
In Stanley's story of AI, mechaniques, mechanical simulations of human beings are designed according to the tasks that they are built to perform. There are au pair or nanny mechas.
I have many good references.
There are chef mechas. Jude Law plays a lover mecha named Gigolo Joe.
I know all about women.
Mechas are basically made to, in a sense, ease the burden of humans' lives, at the same time putting many humans out of work and creating a kind of class struggle. But there are many different kinds of robots in AI, a lot of them worse for wear because of the fact that they've been abandoned by their owners, turned loose. And once these robots are turned loose, they lose their operating license. And once they have no operating license, it is open season for the characters like Lord Johnson Johnson, whose job it is to gather up all the garbage, all the antique iron, as he puts it, of robots that have been turned out, castaways, and to retrieve them and bring them to these large kind of event carnivals called flesh fairs, where they tear the robots apart for the general amusement of the human being. And David, of course, and Gigolo Joe are always on the run, trying not to get caught by those who are snatching unlicensed robots and putting them in the flesh fairs.
They made us too smart, too quick, and too many. We are suffering for the mistakes they made because when the end comes, all that will be left is us.
Robot design started about 4 months before production. Every robot is different, and Steven was very specific about this. In the very beginning, he said, you know, let your imaginations go, and the design concepts were very, very extreme, but there was always an element of humanity in every robot, and Steven wanted to hold on to that humanity of the artificial intelligent world.
I'm a custom job. 75 years ago, I was Time Magazine's Mecha of the Year.
So our robots range from completely mechanical robots to makeup designs that we created here for actors wearing heavy prosthetics.
My time? Is it up already?
In the case of like the gardener, which is a completely animatronic puppet, there would be no human component that would play part of that role. It was decided early on that this would just be a puppet, and that there wouldn't be a human component, there wouldn't be a CG computer-generated version of this to augment performance and things like that.
I still work, don't I? I can work in the dark, but my lamp is broken.
So we pretty much knew on the outset, character by character, how much of their performance would be based on a puppet.
Could you kind of shoot me over the propeller thing?
How much would be based on an actor playing that robot, or how much would be created later on by ILM as a computer-generated character.
There's a robot, the welder, who's played by Dave Smith, who is an amputee and a friend of mine, who is one of the principals in an organization called Stuntability, where the actors with disabilities are used, therefore making their disabilities abilities. And so here is a robot that one of his arms is a welding tool. And it's perfect to be able to use, an amputee in a situation like that. There were many amputees used in all of the designs, and with that, some of the most inspiring actors on the set were the various amputees who acted as robots.
Flesh Fair was, for the robots, their first major scene. It was 16 weeks into the build, and we had 20-some puppets that we knew would be working for 1 week straight. We had taken great care in making sure that in the cage sequence and for all the torture devices that we worked through with the art department and Michael Antier's crew, the special effects crew, to make sure that we could operate all of these characters. The cage sequence was the major scene that we knew that all of our robots would be working in simultaneously. In the cage we had the full range of characters, from actors performing under prosthetic makeups. We had amputees wearing special prostheses that we made for them so that they could move around and still look like their limbs were falling apart.
History repeats itself.
There is an homage to Stan in it. The guys here just couldn't get away without doing it. They insisted, so the insecurity guard, which is a robot that I love, not just because he was, I just loved the robot. The design of him is based on me.
We had fully animatronic puppets, cable puppets, rod puppets, hydraulic puppets, all radio controlled and rod puppeteered. The cage itself was built over a 6-foot pit that they dug into the floor of the Spruce Goose Dome. While there were 20-some performers and puppets up above, there were 20 to 25 puppeteers right underneath them doing all the movement on cable controllers. We had another 20 puppeteers outside with radios. A total of 46 puppeteers and technicians were required for the Flesh Fair sequence, where all of our robots would be working simultaneously. It was a massive undertaking to get them all up and running and performing to camera, all in the same shots.
Teddy, this is David.
Hello, Teddy.
Hello, David.
We designed our first Teddy just as a prototype, what he would look like, showed him to Steven. Steven had his comments. We went back and for a couple weeks did some redesigning, adding different characters of color and light and structure to give Teddy a very relatable appearance, yet a certain uniqueness for the story. Then we got into the technical aspect of how is he going to work. How are we going to do as much as we can live, which is always the scenario. We knew going in that we weren't going to be able to do everything Teddy does with a live teddy bear. Again, it was going to be this hopefully seamless blend between live action and the CG world. There will be some incredible CG Teddy work in AI. But from a live action standpoint, we wanted to be able to do as much as we possibly could do.
I'll break, David.
We did a lot of testing as we were going along building Teddy. We built basically a very simple rod bear to begin with, just muslin and foam, and jointed it just to see what the best movement would be, how easy or difficult it would be to get different body positions, the different gait of his walk whilst he's doing it. And it kind of progressed gradually from there, and we learned a lot just doing very simple tests to make sure that everything worked well before you go into production on what the real bear would be, or any puppet. There were 6 puppeteers to perform Teddy, for the arms, the head, the body, the legs, facial features. Usually we use cables to control the lips, but on this show we decided to use paddles, which would make the lips move a little faster and get the more pronunciation in the words that we needed.
You will break.
It was probably the most difficult puppet that I've ever worked with, or in fact any of the other guys have either, just because we had to take this character all the way through the movie. We did look at videos of Winnie the Pooh and other bears in film history to get the different types of walks that were available. Eventually, it kind of boiled down to what I could actually perform in the suit. We had a rig where I would be attached to Teddy. He would be in front of me about 3 foot, and my feet are connected to his feet. It was kind of like skiing almost.
What do we do?
We run now.
So I went over and recorded all my lines totally out of any context. I had no idea where it fit in the context of the story, and which is part of the reason why I'm on the set every day, because we have the lines and the puppeteers have been able to work with the lines.
Be careful, David. This is not a toy.
And they had to have that in order to really learn how to make the face look real. But then Steven will say, well, when you recorded it, it was too much emphasis this way, or it wasn't conspiratorial enough, or whatever, and we'll redo them right on the set. And they'll feed it into the computer.
And then we could just basically press a button, and Teddy would perform the dialogue that Jack had given us.
Be careful, David. This is not a toy.
Jack gave a lot to Teddy's performance just through his voice. Just the inflections that he had really helped us so that we could actually give different body movement to help sell that piece of dialogue that Steven had.
He had a series of expression heads that would range from his hero head, which within itself would reach many, many ranges of expression because there were 24 servos operating that little head. So he had a good range of expression just in the hero head itself. Then we had a happy head, which, you know, had a broader smile. We had a sad head. We had a concerned head, you know, a curmudgeon face. We had these various expression heads, and each of them were interchangeable with the hero body. Then we also had a self-contained Teddy, where everything was self-contained and could be carried around, and also had a limited amount of performance, body movement and arm movement, and Haley Joel could carry the Teddy around with him. Teddy literally worked every day of a 67-day shooting schedule. That's unheard of with a robotic or animatronic.
I am not a toy.
Once you've had a lover robot, you'll never want a real man again.
Gigolo Joe was, from a design concept, again, he was one of the stars, and the design concept of him was a very, very, very difficult one for us to nail.
When we were developing Jude's character, we did a lot of testing. We were trying to use a product called silicone, which has recently been used quite successfully in a couple of other films, and we wanted to develop a really great look for Jude using the silicone because it would be the perfect thing to use on somebody who was looking synthetic. And we did several tests with him, different designs of full face synthetic looking people, and we found that it kind of was a little bit too surrealistic. It didn't really reflect Jude's warmth and his friendliness, which we really wanted to have.
We were ready to get made up?
We're ready to get made up.
Right.
What we wound up doing is we wound up going to using a very simple prosthetic on his jawline. And in that case, then I had to go develop a look for him that would still give him that kind of plasticized look, but which would be flexible enough so that it wouldn't crack on his face. So through many, many tests, we finally found a configuration that we could actually use foam latex prosthetics in conjunction with a layering technique which I developed to create this plasticized look on his face. So I think it was very successful. His hair was also something that we wanted to make. We're thinking, well, if they can develop this robot, then they definitely are going to be able to give him human-looking hair. So we tested with wigs and we found that we didn't like the look of that. So what I wound up doing was, after his hair was styled, I made a stencil that would go all around his hairline. And what I did was I airbrushed within his own hairline to make it look like perhaps underneath where they put the hair in, they had like a form that they sprayed on so they knew where to put the hair in. Kind of like almost like a doll. Done.
That's all, folks.
This is an extremely ambitious, busy movie that is a completely artificial world that had to be designed and created and shot. This is without a doubt the most ambitious movie I have ever worked on in my career.
To create an artificial being has been the dream of man since the birth of science.
Your machine
I'm a boy. My name is David.
I'm David! I'm David! I'm David!
Normally I don't get involved in a lot of films until pretty late, until the film is shot and they're cutting the film, but on this one I was able to be involved really early, before they shot anything. So the first discussions I had about the film were in general about what the feeling of the film was going to be. Got to go early on to the art department where they were designing. Some people from Stanley Kubrick had worked on the film for years before, were still working on the look of the film. So I got to spend a day looking at the designs of what the cities would look like and the characters and the vehicles. So that was fantastic. Just gave me a great idea what the film was going to be like. From the time I read the script, it was pretty obvious the movie broke into these 3 distinct sections, each with their own feeling. Since I was involved early on, we had time to record a lot of new material. So we were able to start a long time ago recording robotic sounds, interesting little futuristic motors that we could use. But what I found myself mostly doing is taking any source material I could and making a palette of musical sound effects or tonal sound effects for everything. Like the vehicles are electric vehicles, but they sound very musical. So the sounds in the movie are made up of a lot of original recordings we were able to start making a long time ago. The best way I find to work with Steven is to show him stuff, to get reactions. One of the first things I did, which was really fun and unique for me, was to come up with voices for some of the characters in the movie that are a robot in the movie.
Could you kind of shoot me over the propeller thing?
Or a special effect in the movie.
Starving minds, welcome to Dr. No.
So I looked for interesting voices and would try them against some early pictures and send those to Steven to see what he thought.
Go to her, David. She's just waking up this instant.
Teddy, come here.
There's so many different scenes that have a different quality to them. We have a wide variety of scenes, from this really gritty, realistic, noisy scene of the flesh fair, where essentially robots are being destroyed in a carnival atmosphere in ritualistic, huge ways. It's wild, it's crazy, it's cacophony, it's reality at its grittiest and scariest.
You have been searching for me, haven't you, David?
And then at the other end of the spectrum, the blue fairy appears to David at the end of the film, and everything is, you're not even sure what's real and what's dreamlike or imagined. It all adds up to a very unique tone. So my job now is to try to emulate that, or to support that with the sound each step of the way, so that the sound is doing the same thing.
Your wish is my command. Teddy, this is David.
Hello, Teddy.
Hello, David.
When I first read the script and talked to Steven, he had this idea of the Teddy character, since he's a small little teddy bear, but he wanted to have this older, wise, flat voice.
Martin, no.
He kept mentioning Eeyore. He liked the feeling of Eeyore. It's not exactly right, but he liked that evenness of tone.
I see the moon.
In the midst of all this strange goings-on and even danger, to have this little teddy bear speak in a very calm, adult tone would be a relaxing thing for a companion to a child.
What happened?
I don't know.
We are in a cage.
So what I did early on is look for interesting voices, people, actors.
We are in a cage.
And I even took snippets from movies, from more famous actors, and I cut them against some early face tests for Teddy, just to get a feeling. And I would send them to Steven, and he would react. And he finally picked Jack Angel, who was a voice actor. He really caught the spirit of that wisdom and calm.
Be careful, David. This is not a toy.
Almost a flat counterpoint to all the craziness going on around. What I do is I work on a synclavier, which is a keyboard that can play sound effects, and so for this movie I've been doing a lot of things. This is a choir of kids that just but you can use it for, say, underwater, and amphibicopter passes by. Instead of a normal sound, you could just do something with this. So you can take these tonalities, which are from musical sources, kids singing, and turn them into these very musical sound effects. AI is pushing the sound in a very almost psychological way, which I love.
It doesn't hurt.
The power of sound really is in its emotional aspect. It gets to us, like music, sound, all types of sound, I think, have a direct connection to our emotions. With all the various things in AI, the most important part that the sound plays is to make us experience through David, through his character. Experience the magic and the fright and the wonder and the confusion. And then, because it's a fable, it becomes magical in a very strong way.
Mommy! We're home!
Stanley Kubrick happened to see my very first graphic novel, and he got his assistant to get in touch with me, and it was as simple as that. I'd never done any film work before, and it was some kind of inspiration on his part to actually choose me to actually come and work on AI. And when we met, he told me nothing about AI at all. We actually just chatted about movies for a good while, about what we liked and didn't like and whatever. And I kind of asked him, well, what do you actually want me to do on this movie? And he said, well, pretty much anything that you want to do on this movie as far as developing the look of it. Again, it was as simple as that. We did not discuss AI at all on the first meeting. I didn't read the script until something like 5 months later, and actually found out what it was all about. It was a basic overview of what the film was about. I was there as like a conduit, which was just to generate material from that original outline and just present this to Stanley. He would look at it and say yes or no, right direction, wrong direction, and just keep, to be honest, churning this stuff out so that he could begin to visualize what he'd put down on paper. Steven just wanted me to carry on with what I was doing with Stanley, really, and obviously crystallize it for the project and actually take all this material that had been generated and actually start to shape it into something that is going to be turned into a movie. And Rick can almost generate from my sketches. It gave him a lot of free rein, and they've improved quite a bit on my initial designs.
Early on in the process of developing this movie, Steven talked to me about this idea that Stanley Kubrick had told him about that related to the movie, actually one part of it, which is the idea of mode jerking. So it's the idea that you go from one mode to another mode to another mode, and that was supposed to be a kind of an entertainment in Rouge City when they got there, which is what this set is here. And I realized that this whole movie is like mode jerking. Once David starts on his journey, it just goes from one incredible place to another to another. And so I think one of the big leaps that it takes is into Rouge City.
There's Mildred. I have to show you inside Mildred.
It's just this extravagant place of sex and debauchery. Well, to start from the very beginning here, in fact, one of the reasons Steven wanted to make the movie was an illustration that Chris Baker did of the entrance to Rouge City, which is where the bridge takes them right through the mouths into this city. And then Chris had done a number of wonderful sketches of types of buildings that might be in a place like Rouge City. So what I did was I took those and said, well, if I was in Rouge City, where would those buildings be? What would be the layout that could actually allow us to see those types of views? And then we've added to that other buildings, other things, other views, and then from there it collaged into a geographical space that we could actually understand that the boulevard was out here, and this was the way it looked in terms of the color illustrations that we did. And then with ILM, they would actually put that into their computer and make a model. We only have one half of the boulevard, for instance. And then off that boulevard is this place here that we designed to go into this stage. Now we're in the virtual Rouge City set, which is the blue screen set where ILM is going to create the boulevard that will be seen in the movie, which is all these huge architectural shapes that make up the big part of Rouge City. They've put all these targets up top here so that you can actually tell where you are in the space. So right now I'm in Rouge City, and in fact there's a 360-degree environment around me. But you won't see that until you see it in the movie or on the monitor that they're going to have when we actually shoot here, which will be able to show us where geographically we are.
That's tails. Very hoity-toity.
Almost this entire movie has been shot in the soundstage in very controlled settings, and I think that's a great thing for this movie. Only going out to Oregon for a location has allowed us to really create, I think, a world that all these worlds take place in. And I guess I always saw this as the Wizard of Oz. So I always wanted this to be something that could be of one mind, and I think that we'll hopefully be able to do that. And part of that is because we're on a soundstage. Most of the time we're very controlled. After 2,000 years of praying and wishing and hoping to become real, David has been underwater, and the water has frozen and become ice, and now we're in the ice age, and the robots have come and they've started to dig and to try to discover their roots, and they've come upon David.
Cut, great.
At the moment, Steven's on another sound stage over shooting at the Lions building, and then David's going to jump in the water, and then Steven will be coming here tomorrow to shoot on this sound stage. My job is to be always ahead of him, because he doesn't stop, and he usually comes early, ahead of time. So we're expecting him any moment, in fact. So we're trying to work out all the last minute details, and tomorrow we'll have a big ice machine in here blowing ice all over this. We want to make sure that this is what he had in mind. Since the last time he saw this, this was just a very roughed out little space, and now it's far more developed. As a set designer or a production designer, everything I get to be involved with is moving from one entire world to another. And it's like each thing in some ways is separate and almost entirely different, even contradictory. But they're all in this one journey that forms the basis of David's experience in this movie. And it's his evolution, but it's our evolution. Because where this movie goes, we're ultimately looking back on all of this. And this was what we went through, and then what David went through in order to get to where he needed to be at the very end of the movie, which is way out there.
Undress. At Cybertronics of New Jersey, the artificial being has reached its highest form. Universally adopted, Mecca, the basis for hundreds of models, serving the human race in all the multiplicity of daily life.
I really saw it as a sort of an adventure story where this little boy is living in a very sort of middle class, upper middle class environment, which is very controlled and very simple to look at. You know, the clothes for that, we just did a very classic American clothes, not too much colour, not too much shape. Tried to do generic clothes that wouldn't date too much, so the film could look, periodless. And so I tried to do, to give it the science fiction element, just very classic generic clothes. And then had a bit more fun with the adventure as that boy goes off on it. Once he's thrown out by the mother,
Oh, I have to go!
then the adventure starts.
Don't you get in there. Boy! Hey, what's your name?
So then we got much more inventive for the clothes. But even then, the clothes were very controlled. You know, I didn't go into a mad fantasy land. Even Rouge City, if you look at it, is very, very controlled.
Couldn't tell a joke from a poke.
I think originally when we started on the film, it was going to be much more fantastical, much more catwalky, fashiony. And I think as Steven worked through the film himself, I think he brought it down into a more real place. And so in the end, I tried to do a sort of futuristic Las Vegas city that had all the elements, trashy people, classy, sexy people. Like when you go to a city isn't populated with one style of people. And so I usually get a series of photographs, and in fact for this I did lots of pasted out boards with all sorts of photographs that had nothing really to do with anything, except that when you looked at them all, it gave an atmosphere. And then I tried to design the atmosphere, not the clothes.
Hey, Joe, what do you know?
Hey, Jane, how's the game?
I can't accept this!
Well, with Frances playing Mrs. Swinton, we had her over at the wardrobe and I just tried on literally hundreds of clothes on her just to see what worked. And usually you don't have the luxury of that time to do that, but I must have had her there for about 2 or 3 times for 4-hour sessions where I just went and got loads of clothes together and we put them all together and then out of those sessions we photographed everything, and Mrs. Swinton just started to emerge out of that process.
Sorry.
It's like rehearsing, it's the designer rehearsing with an actor, like a director would rehearse the scenes. We rehearsed the clothes.
He's a gift from you.
The process for designing Haley's character was actually the most difficult of all for the film, because when I started early on, Steven and the production, they weren't really sure how robotic everything was going to be. The robots hadn't been designed, and he was playing a robot, but they didn't want it to look too robotic. And we all agreed originally that the clothes and the look would be much more robotic and slightly stranger and more science fiction-y. But as Steven worked on the script and as he worked into the film, I think he carried on thinking about it and writing the script and made the boy more and more real and less robotic.
When's your birthday?
And in the end, we used very ordinary clothes. I just controlled the colour and the pattern, and then they did that very simple stylized makeup on him. And we came down to a very, very simple look on that boy.
Try and narrow it down.
New category.
Steven wanted him originally to have we talked about Dracula and other romantic heroes from the past, and I think what he wanted to distill was the essence of a sort of romantic, sexy hero. Take the elements of those with a dangerous quality, and then take all those elements and distill them down and then push them into a slightly futuristic thing. And quite by chance I found this material, which is actually fishing line woven as a satin, and it looks like on the screen like liquid metal, and we just made a sort of basically frock coat suit and give the frock coat a slightly Victorian feel to it, which was a traditional, and originally he had a big cravat, but we decided to lose that and make a much simpler, it was actually a plastic shirt we made in the end.
Patricia, once you've had a lover robot, you'll never want a real man again.
And then V. Neal, worked endlessly as we were doing. We did hundreds of versions of clothes for him. The makeup gives him just enough unreality, and the clothes are basically made of plastic. Yet they're made like normal clothes. And I did endless romantic shirts, and the one we came down to is my idea. It looks a bit like a sort of a robotic Victorian romantic hero crossed with. Sort of Elvis Presley in a way. That's really the look, I think.
It's Joe, at your service.
When Steven first talked to me about AI, it was very, very secretive, no script, very little information. It was described as kind of a search for love using all of the tools that the effects world might offer, which of course piques my curiosity. Mostly I would approach him as a director. And I very much test and photograph and go to him and just visually get a reaction from him. That was my whole approach on AI. I didn't have a list of things I was going to do. We would talk about Flesh Fair. We would talk about the excavation pit. We would talk about the moon ship. We would talk about, and I'd see some pictures, and I would start building. And I would start showing Steven. And Steven would say, more, less, yeah, that's perfect. And I'd say, let me show you a test. And I probably pretty much went through the whole movie showing him either digital stills or digital video of what I was doing, so that his options remained open in what he was going to do. And the one great thing about working with Steven is I always feel like all of my efforts go on the screen. In Flesh Fair, Steven came up with this idea that we would have a couple of cannons. And we had much like a ring, like a Colosseum affair, if you will. And out of the cannons have to shoot two people who travel 50 yards, who go through a ring, who catch on fire, and then hit 12-foot spinning metal blades, bust up into pieces, and land on stage where this heavy metal group Ministry is playing.
Yes, we're lighting the ring.
And I told him just one day as a kind of a lark that I thought we could do this live action. And we did. Stan built some robots, some dummies for us that were fiberglass. And we purposely put very little insides in them. And we put them on a cable and used a ratchet and pulled them out of the cannon, pulled them through the ring, trailing a wire, had suits and clothes made out of flash paper that would ignite.
We gotta get the arms on there.
Then literally had a burning projectile that flew into spinning metal blades that busted up into hundreds of pieces and flew all over. And we had to do this inside a ring with 800 extras and a live playing band on stage. So just from a standpoint of danger, I had to test it.
Sir, ready?
I had to get the fire department involved. Tell them what kind of a safety circle we needed.
I am the body electric.
Talk to the band, talk to the actors.
Okay, this shot right here features all of you.
Talk to everybody, tell them where they could be. And really not miss. And we got through the whole thing without any kind of a hazard. Rouge City was a good example of how working with the art department pays off. I needed a track down the center of the street in Rouge City, and Rick was nice enough to put a line down the center, which meant before we built the set, I was able to build in a track with an endless cable that would pull a motion base. On top of that motion base, we hand-assembled the amphibicopter, which is a helicopter which flies above land and underwater. So we could travel a motion base and have a spinning helicopter and travel it the whole length of Rouge City with people in it, with extras in it, and not run off the track or not hit anybody. We could predictably make the move. We knew exactly where it was going to go, even though it looked like it was out of control. We knew where it would start, where it would stop, how many turns it would take. We could put the camera in it. We could photograph it going by. And the whole thing weighed about 6,000 pounds.
Stay clear, please. Okay, here we go.
So you don't want to hit anything, you don't want to run into anything, and you certainly don't want to go past your stops and run into the stage wall. So just that by itself was just another whole section of the film that we had to take under our wing and do. What ILM will do, will paint out the motion base, and you'll have a flying helicopter that's 6 feet off the ground that flies through a group of people, and it's all there for real. So it's about as much as what you take out of the film as what you put into the film.
Destination
Manhattan.
In the ice excavation scene, we went through about 8 tons of real ice a day. One of the things that we didn't want to settle for was a fake look. So everything had to be dripping, everything had to be wet, everything had to, and this is a key part of the movie, where the Blue Fairy exists. So it was made to look as though literally it had been there for thousands of years, and the set itself was really constructed and then covered with real ice. Every morning, 3 hours before shooting, real ice was brought in so that it would melt realistically, and every time it got down to a point where it wasn't quite right, we would add more. And you don't see that very often. Most people would opt to use fake ice, but in this case, it's such an important part of the movie, and the look is so different that we went to the extent of really doing it for real. The great thing about AI is I don't think that there's one effect in that movie that's not cutting edge. I think that everything had to be so fit into the story. And we took it to a level in Rouge City on our blue screen stage where there's work that has never been done before. It is beyond cutting edge. It just goes way beyond anything you've ever seen. It will not be a traditionally made movie, and it will not look traditional.
When you become a real boy, remember me to the ladies when you grow up.
And I think it will hold up for a long time.
I am.
Good. Very nice. That was a great reading.
Mama Chicana, padre. Goes forward to Haiti, goes around and comes back to that mark. Right.
Let's look at like 35,
With artificial intelligence, it's really interesting because I think several months ago, maybe last year around this time, I think he asked me to come to his house, and he very secretly told me that he thinks that he's got a movie that he's going to do next. And he showed me storyboards, original storyboards from Kubrick's design. And he read me the treatment of the movie. The treatment that was the original treatment prepared by Kubrick. And it was just really exciting. And he was very excited about the possibility of making that movie. Actually, at that point, it was not a possibility. At that point, he already made his mind up. Although it was still very private, it was not announced, but that was the next movie we're going to do.
And cut, let's just go a little higher.
I think the movie has definitely three totally different looks, you know. It's the first opening of the movie, the first act has its own clinical kind of sterile storytelling in terms of photography and lighting. Then you get into second act. Which is very much of a little bit of an action adventure.
Be careful, David. This is not a toy.
You know, and the third act is extremely emotional, almost kind of a drama.
You have been searching for me, haven't you, David?
My whole life.
I do love you.
You know, Steve and I, we really don't discuss the visual aspect of the movie that much anymore. You know, he's got great and interesting visual ideas, but we don't look at books, we don't look paintings, you know. And you know, story always dictates its own look, its own approach, and the way it's supposed to be photographed and blocked. You know, I firmly believe in reading the screenplay, understanding the screenplay, and trying to figure out what is the writer saying, so you can really reflect that through photography and lighting.
To create an artificial being has been the dream of man since the birth of science.
Steven likes smoke, I like smoke, you know. I probably like smoke a little bit more than he does. But, you know, I like ambience. I like rain, smoke, mist, you know. I like looking through things. I like having the frame to be obscured by other things, not to just have a clean frame, you know. That's, again, if the story allows for it, you do it, you know. Smoke is just another tool. It's a tool that gives you a little bit of an atmosphere, or creates ambience, you know. It diffuses the light, makes the colors more pastelish. You start seeing the light, especially when you're working on the stage. It creates certain sense of reality, because there's always a little fog or mist in the air.
Cut! Beautiful.
6 foot, I see this sucker right here.
Applause. Action.
Inspirations are all around me, you know. I can't say that for this particular movie I was inspired by any particular painting or artwork, you know. I use my life experience to express myself, and this movie happened to have certain aesthetics that I associate with. Steven uses his instinct and I use my instinct in my work, and it's a fast pace, but it's great. It's really good, you know.
Steven is very comfortable with the use of music in his films. AI, I think, has over 2-hour scores, but his particular kind of lyricism, his particular kind of emotional palette that he creates, seems to lend itself to music to the extent that we don't feel we're taken away from the state of reality, or the reality that he's trying to conjure for us, by the presence of the orchestra, which can happen with another kind of film. So the music, I think, is quite schizophrenic, at least in my mind, because you have very tonal aspects, some string in the beginning. You have the piano at the end. Then there are sections that are very atonal, which is to say dissonant, or without the gravity of the tonal system to root it. Some sort of postmodern things for this flying of the helicopter. A lot of use of electronics, much more than I usually do.
Be careful, David. This is not a toy.
Also, you have a snippet of Tchaikovsky. And a bit of Rosenkavalier you even hear when they go into Rue City, which incidentally, this quotation of Richard Strauss was the one piece of music that Stanley Kubrick requested that Steven leave in the film. We don't know why. The Waltz from Rosenkavalier of Richard Strauss. It was something in his mind, in Kubrick's mind. We don't know why he wanted it. It's the one thing he stipulated. It should be that melody from Richard Strauss in some area. So very difficult for me to find a place where it fit. But there's a section for about 30 seconds where they drive through those great faces, you know, across the bridge into Rue City, where on top of my own music I threaded with the waltz theme from Rosenkavalier as an homage to Kubrick completely, without fully realizing what the connection in his mind was. So it's a very eclectic score and a very voluminous score, very different from the things that Steven and I have done before, with the possible exception maybe of Close Encounters. I think it's closer to that in its timbral aspect. There are several melodies which are, I would call them cantilena almost. The most prominent one is the one that's played at the end. And I wrote half a dozen of these examples, not fully extended, and played them for Steven. We kept working on the last scene, the death of the mother. And I would play these themes on the piano and we would lay them against the film. And the one that we finally used seemed to both of us to be the right expression. It's very simple, although it has its complexities. And it's also very direct. And that scene is about 7 minutes long. So it's a long stretch of material for a cantilena of that particular type. If it works, it's the result of our being able to make some kind of emotional connection with associations of lullaby, of a connection between a child and a mother. It seemed like the right solution. I think the thing that's unique about AI, for me at least, is the essential spiritual aspects of what it was examining.
I propose that we build a robot who can love.
The idea that to be able to love someone is the thing that defines humanity in the end. At the end of the film, when David, who's been looking for his mother and wanting to be human all these centuries now, when his mother has her final biological death, he is able to die at the end of the film, and thereby achieving his humanity. By being able to die, he's proven himself to be human, which is the one thing that we all share, we all eventually will do. So these are subjects that are abstract and spiritual and very personal, and they go right to where music can speak to. Music is really about this kind of thing at its core. Not every film, as great as it can be, if it's an adventure film, it may be about hunting sharks, you know. And in emotional musical terms, that may be about heroism, or it may be about fear.
There is no substitute for your own child!
But this film is about very wonderful things to conjure and to ruminate on.
But outside, he just looks so real. Like he is a child.
As a consequence of that unique set of subjects, musically, it made it a special opportunity and challenge for me.
Over the years, I was getting phone calls from Stanley Kubrick, probably from the late 1980s or so, about some technical question here or there, and it was always really neat to pick up a phone and there's, you know, hey, it's Stanley here. And they would come out of nowhere. And then I got a call one time saying, you know, he's got this project that he's interested in doing, and he wanted me to come over to England and take a look at it and talk to him about it. And we had just finished Jurassic Park at that time. And I said, sure, that was great. And ILM was nice enough to pay our way over there, and Ned Gorman, my producer, went over with me at the time, and we spent a Thanksgiving day with Stanley Kubrick. And it was very nice. He'd set up this wonderful turkey dinner for us and all. And we managed to stay on California time, and he was very charming. It was really a really wonderful evening. A great 5 hours I'll never forget. He'd been thinking about this project called AI, is what he told us, for quite a while, and it involved a robot boy. And he wasn't sure how to make this main character in the movie. If it should be an animatronic character, or if it could be possibly a real character with makeup on, or if it could be computer graphics. And when he's seen the work in Jurassic Park, he thought, boy, maybe there's an opportunity to use some new technology. So I showed him a lot of the work we had done in Jurassic, and he spent, you know, an hour or two asking me a ton of questions about visual effects. He had a clipboard with him and a whole list of questions, and just sort of went right through that list one to one, asking about, you know, how do you do this, how do you do that, do you think you should try something this way, or whatever. And he was not terribly forthcoming on the story. I knew about the robot boy, and I knew about New York being flooded. He had a piece of artwork he had done at that time, maybe a couple of them that had been done.
And cut.
Got it? I had been hearing in the rumor mill that Steven had been approached or something about AI. I didn't even know Steven had been talking to Stanley. And then I got a call from Steven saying, you know, could you come down for a meeting? And I think, you know, I'm going to do this AI film. And I just couldn't believe it.
She was on this.
And when I got down there, Steven showed me probably hundreds, maybe 1,000 pieces of artwork. And all during that time, I was still getting calls from Stanley every week or every month about questions, but never telling me specifically what the shots were about, but just questions about effects. And I could see where he was leading to. You know, he was trying to get information on how to do this work.
Okay, here we go.
One of the things that I was excited about doing the show with Steven was we will actually get the movie made.
Okay, here we go, let's shoot it.
Because I didn't know Stanley was ever going to get it made. And with Steven doing it, boy, we can do it. And having worked with him so long, I know we communicate pretty well about how to do it.
Hey, Steven, remember we talked about sort of one swipe? Yeah. If it's outside of the camera range and there's one swipe across.
So let's just spread ourselves out over the whole thing.
One of the things we'd done on the film was to have on the set a pre-visualization system. You could actually see pretty close to the finished shot as you were shooting the actual foreground actors in front of the blue screen. So the cameraman would see the actors in front of the blue screen, but on a TV monitor at that point we would see the actual composite. We'd see the characters in the background. And that would give Steven an idea about new shots, because he's not looking with an actor in front of a blue screen anymore. He's looking at a scene with the actor in front of the synthetic environment. And the system we set up was something that the cameraman could pick the camera up and do a handheld shot, walk around like you would as a documentary, find the camera angles anywhere you want, and you could always see the same view that he saw as though the buildings were actually there. So it gave Steven a tremendous sense of freedom to be inspired. We had targets around, primarily on the ceiling, that were barcoded, and we had probably about 800 of them. Each one had its own separate identity, and they were being looked at by a camera. And then the software in the computer could identify which barcode fit with which place. So as you pan the camera around, it knew in the computer world where the computer camera was looking around. And they matched up perfectly. And then we could generate in the computer what the buildings look like, and then do essentially a video composite of the blue screen with this CG background. The movie, encompasses essentially, this contemporary environment that you sort of see for the first part of the film, inside the home when David's growing up and all, getting you set up then for the next kind of surprise when you get out of that world and you see that it's a different city. You're way in the future, it's obvious, and the fabulous Rouge City stuff. And then after we leap to 2,000 years in the future, the movie's about AI, but by the end of the film, we're essentially making it. The movie is mostly synthetic, and AI actually becomes how we're making the movie. We're starting out contemporary, ending up totally artificially in the future.
The ILM art department implemented and designed many environments and concepts that were part of the film. A lot of ideas that came from Chris Baker and Rick Carden, Steven Spielberg, and basically what we did is we prepared everything for model and CG work, as well as we designed quite a bit of the sequences more towards the third act. For example, the theme park, the underwater sequence where the ice caps have melted and the waterline has risen and Coney Island is underwater. We kind of set out to make this one area of Coney Island, which is this fictitious old world Italy that was Pinocchio's world. So in order to create this Pinocchio world, or this theme park underwater, we looked at a lot of concept art and sort of try to figure out the schematic of how this would be laid out when we shoot the miniatures. And we did that through some sketches and some paintings, some concept paintings, to sort of develop a mood and a feel for what this place should be.
So what buildings are right around the set?
Dennis Mirren decided to shoot it in Dry for Wet. Dry for Wet is simulating underwater photography, but in fact there is no water. We're shooting in a smoke-filled room, and the smoke, the density of smoke, kind of gives you the illusion of being under 100 feet of water. It's just so much easier, photography-wise. The underwater lighting kind of dictates the details of the models. In this case, it's pretty much silhouetted, and whenever the light hits our models, then all the colors pop out. So in many cases, we could kind of get away with we had a lot of freedom, actually. Matter of fact, I would insist that nobody use any sandpaper at all on this model because it was so encrusted with underwater life. It didn't matter. So we could really speed up the construction of the model.
It took many, many buildings to create this set, and it was a very long, complicated stage shoot also here at ILM to provide all the backgrounds that we needed for those shots. And then once we photographed those backgrounds, then we took a helicopter that we built in computer graphics and added that into the shots with all kinds of computer graphic elements to give it a water look. And then Rouge City was also another huge, very complex set.
I agonized over this. It's always a tough call whether or not do you build it in CG, computer graphics, or do you build real physical models. I decided eventually that the first row of buildings, including Bunny behind me, should be actual physical models. And then put background computer graphics buildings in. I think we have every discipline that we know how to do involved in making those composite shots. We have live action blue screen photography. We have huge model construction. We have multiple light paths incorporation. We have computer graphics animation. There's probably no trick in the book that we don't have somehow glued into what these shots will be. And hopefully when audiences see these shots, they'll just say, hey, that's pretty cool.
Mecca restricted area.
For the sequence where Jude Law and Haley are flying through New York City, we have our CG water and we have our CG waterfalls. The building right here, the broken building, is actually a scale miniature, while the building that is crashed into is a computer graphics painting, as are other buildings in the background, and the sky was pieced together from a bunch of pieces. There's a bunch of different things that we had to do. Sometimes the amphibicopter is completely computer generated, like when it's much smaller in frame, or if it has to do some really wacky move, or the amphibicopter might be a live action stage thing that we shot on blue screen, and we took the windshield off of the amphibicopter while we shot it so that we could put in the reflections of whatever buildings they're flying by instead of all the lights and rigs and set on the stage. And we have to add buildings in the background. They might be model buildings, you know, scale models, or we might have computer generated models, or we might have photographs of buildings that we put on little cards and put that in our computer render.
Turn around, Joe. Turn all the way around.
And we have a water simulation to generate some computer-generated oceans that are flowing through all of the streets of New York City. This is some of the concept art that was done for this shot, and this is what the shot's looking like right now. As you can see, we kept a lot of the elements of the concept art, the building that's crashed into, all the damage underneath the building, and of course all the water. Having great concept art just really makes things so much easier, because you don't have to go through 1,000 iterations trying to figure out what things are supposed to look like.
At the end of the world where the lions weep, here is the place dreams are born.
And then we also have this shot a little bit later. They've finally found the building where the lions weep. Again, we have our computer-generated water and waterfalls. The Cybertronics building itself is a scale miniature. It's in real life about 6 feet tall, I think. And the lions that go in front of it are also scale miniatures. And this time the buildings in the back are also scale miniatures. And this is what the sky really looked like that day, except there are some power lines in the back that we removed. And we have our computer-generated water with all the currents rolling through and splashes, and these other buildings in the background are scale miniatures as well.
Hybrid between Ascola and Mida Arnold.
It's a pretty interesting project from the perspective of an animator because we've got 4 really distinct challenges on the show.
Mommy.
We have Teddy, who has to match exactly the Stan Winston animatronic bear on the set.
Ask Dr. No, there's nothing I don't.
We have Dr. No, who's kind of classically cartoonish without any real limits because he's a hologram and he can do whatever we want him to do. And then we have the beings themselves at the end of the film. Very difficult to animate because they're very sculptural, and the minute you start to move them, you have to be very careful. Then we have the Blue Fairy, and she's human-looking but completely unreal. She's probably one of the most challenging performance problems we have on the show. So those 4 things are very different from one another, and they make the project very interesting for us. The biggest challenge with Teddy, it's 2 things. It's how he physically moves has to mimic, in some ways, the animatronic bear.
What do we do?
We run now.
But since we're doing shots that were impossible for the animatronic bear, we have to take it a little bit further. But we always have to maintain that sense of him being a mechanical toy.
I am not a toy.
So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the acting part of it, if you will. I mean, what is Teddy thinking? How does he fit into this world? David's a very sophisticated robot, but Teddy is also a robot, but not as sophisticated. That's a tricky thing because he's written as a full character. He has dialogue, he interacts with the actors, and yet somehow you have to maintain a distance with him that he's really a mechanical creation in their world and a toy. That was the main challenge with him, I think, overall. I looked at a lot of teddy bears when we were first starting this. I would wandering into toy shops, which I spent a lot of time in toy shops anyways, and I looked at a lot of teddy bears, but there really isn't anything that does what Teddy does yet. I think we're very close to having some walking bipedal toys very soon, beyond just, tin wind-ups and things, but things that actually walk, but it isn't there yet. So we had to just kind of look at it and just decide from his physiology, how his legs are set apart, how long they are, how tubby he is, and just sort of look at that and say, well, how would he walk? What's going to look cute on him? I did a walk cycle very early on before the Winston fellows had finished their bear. And so that walk cycle was a bit of inspiration that Steven could take to them and say, this is kind of how the bear should walk. And then they did their best to sort of match that in the shots that they did, and they came up with lots of stuff. And then we took the stuff that they've done now in our shots and kind of worked that in, certain idiosyncrasies of the way the bear moves, the way his joints work, the way, the kinds of things he's capable of doing and not capable of doing. We could take all that and fold it into our bear. And we end up with hopefully something that's a credible little mechanical bear that people will believe in. I went down for the recording of Robin Williams with Steven.
Welcome to Dr. No!
And that was the beginning of really figuring out what the character, how he should move, what his facial expressions might be like. And Robin did all kinds of great stuff that we videotaped that was not necessarily directly copied, but was all very inspirational in creating the animation of the character. And then the character itself up here went through further art direction and design stages from the production artwork that we received. And then when the shots went into production, we would take the audio.
Question me, you pay the fee. 2 for 5, you get 1 free.
And I would, talk over the shots with the animators, and they would just come up with the business. Just really mannerisms for Dr. No that are fun and that just make him interesting to look at. I looked at ballet dancers to begin with for just examples of graceful movement, very controlled movement. Then also one thing that Dennis Muren suggested would be to look at actors who have a very quiet presence. For instance, Alec Guinness. So we looked at some scenes with Alec Guinness acting where He is presenting dialogue, but it's very internal. He's not waving his hands around a lot. It's very quiet, but there's a lot of strength in it.
Give him what he wants.
And given that the voice of the specialist was Ben Kingsley, he was also good reference. We searched around that way to find examples of physical acting, physicality that was contained and elegant and graceful, but with a kind of gravity to it. Because there's a long dialogue sequence between the specialist and David, and it's hard to sustain an animated character that long who doesn't have any eyes. I mean, he doesn't have normal human facial expressions, I should say. He doesn't have eyebrows and all the things that make it much easier to register little subtle changes in, inflection and so forth. So we had to do it all through pantomime, essentially, with his character.
Human beings had created a million explanations of the meaning of life in art, in poetry, in mathematical formulas. Certainly human beings must be the key to the meaning of existence.
I think the animators did a great job in trying to emote the character, just using body language and things. And they studied a lot of tapes and listened to the voice and exactly how Ben Kingsley and how he moves and how he acts. The actual face itself was an ongoing discussion for many, many months, trying to figure out exactly the look that Steven would go for. And I think he was certainly unsure of exactly what he wanted and didn't, it was one of those, give me something and let's have a look at it and see if we like it. And we eventually ended up with this mask look to give it some semblance of humanity of a person, but wanting it still to have that bridge between the organic and the mechanical.
The Blue Fairy is one of the hardest things we're doing in that physically she's very realistic. Her proportions are exactly like a real woman's. And yet, in terms of the coloring and the lighting in the scene, and she's very sort of ethereal, and we don't exactly know what she's made of or how she was created.
And what is your wish? Please make me a real boy.
We didn't want to simply have, for instance, an actress in makeup, or to use motion capture to capture a live person's performance and apply it to the model, because both of those things would just be completely naturalistic and too grounded in the real world ultimately. And we wanted something much more stylized, much more, well, like fairy-like in a sense. I mean, she is an icon in a sense, and the way she holds her hands and reaches out to David and so forth, it's very reminiscent of, for instance, statues of Mary. As far as her facial movement and just her whole attitude and that, it's really coming from the design of the statue itself.
David, she can never come home.
It's a very emotional scene. I mean, David's heart is right there, and she's got to be something that the audience is going to buy. So it's very difficult for us. And she's really an amazing character. She's beautiful, and it's just a pleasure to work on.
Your wish is my command.
Stanley investigated several things. He actually built a complete mechanical child that was a complete disaster. The mechanics of what we can do today cannot simulate the liquid movements of, let's say, computer graphic animation. But CGI also has not yet reached a state of the art where it can replicate a human being. We mixed it a bit in Jurassic Park where the animals were CGI and the people, of course, were not. And Shrek is all CGI, and that's an art form unto itself. But to put a digital boy in amongst a cast of human beings photographed on 35mm, we're still years away from that technologically. Stanley knew that, and I certainly appreciated that, so it was really time to cast an actor to play a machine. And Haley Joel Osment was my first and last choice.
First time we had a meeting, he only mentioned the title. The first time we met, he hadn't finished the script. We just met and had just a conversation, about travels in Europe and everything. It was just casual. And the second time, after he'd finished the script, we met actually in this room, I think. And he talked about the script And, you know, after reading it, you know, that was it. Immediately wanted to do it, you know, getting to work with Steven on a script, which was fantastic. And after that, we got everything worked out and we were on the project. We talked with Steven a lot about to what extent would we make him robotic.
He's so real. But he's not.
No, he's not.
We actually progressed the character through the film so that by the end of the film, he's basically human. You know, inside he's a robot, but his actions and everything are human. He develops throughout the story. Everything that he experiences makes him less robotic and less mechanical. So at the beginning of the story, it's not like dun, 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 dun. It was just very simple. We wanted to make the actions very simple and not practical or human like if you were like in a chair, you'd like sit down and David always have perfect posture and he could sit there for several hours or more. And another thing which was really hard was I didn't blink once in this film. And that was a really interesting effect to it. Not even when he gets to the end and he starts acting really human, there's no blinking. And so that was a little tough to do.
David, the most wonderful thing in the whole world has happened.
We shot the first part of the movie in continuity. In the house, it was all in continuity. But then, of course, when we got to shooting all the action sequences and the flesh and everything, we had to get out of it.
You have to move around behind him like that? Good, like that.
We actually did the underwater stuff first, and that was fun. I got to learn how to scuba dive on this film, because we had a lot of parts where I'm underwater. We had to do like scenes where I'm sort of sinking and have to learn to hold my breath for long periods of time and then get on a regulator while I'm sinking because I have lots of weights on. There are a lot of different things I had to learn before I could do this film. It turned out to be a really cool experience because we got to do all these great things in just one film.
Right legs, going again.
More this way, more to your left.
Are you? First thing that would happen, you know, getting there is makeup. That got down to where we could get the makeup on in half an hour. And the whole day, you know, you had to be careful on what you do with your face and your hands because it had this this wax on it that if it was damaged, you would see the skin beneath and it wouldn't look as plastic and shiny as it's supposed to be, so we had to be careful with that. I had school on the set 3 hours a day. Studies, you know, they're setting up for a shot or doing a shot that I'm not in. I'd go to school and study, and then when they need me, I go back and I work, and that's fun to do, you know, working and doing school at the same time. Hey. Dad and I, every night before we go to work the next day, we prepare for the scene. We're always ready before we go there. Dad, he's been acting for a long time. You know, he helps me get into the character and understand everything that's going on, the subtext, and how the storyline incorporates into each scene. And that makes me give a better performance that I could, you know, all on my own. You know, with so much help from Steven and Dad and myself, and the collaboration really made the role better than I ever could myself.
Okay. Thank you. And roll it.
Haley is an amazing actor. I mean, he's one of those actors, at least from my perspective, that you're in the middle of a scene with him and you're watching him and you're going, God, that's really amazing. You know, I dropped out. A few times I just dropped out just looking at him. He's able to play this phenomenally difficult role of a robot that doesn't have emotions yet is programmed to have emotions. I mean, it's, I don't know how he does it.
And not too long of a pause after she told you about this.
You figured out this fantastic kind of logic to his character, so you did feel in some ways that you were playing against something that wasn't real, which was really interesting. I mean, especially for such a young kid to pull that off.
Try to go through all of us. Good.
Yeah.
And all will be right with the world because you held my hand and saved my brain.
I just approached him like an actor that I was going to work with, you know, and that was it. And what was great was I had great fun because he is 12, he likes the same things that I like. Here we are, centre stage. I've always been a great fan of comics and cartoons and kids' films, and I'm just a lover of them, I guess. I'm searching for the child in me, or I am just a very kind of infantile grown-up, I don't know, but working with Haley was just, for me, from day one, like working with any other actor I've worked with.
It really felt like a buddy movie because, you know, Jude and I got to be really good friends while we're shooting and doing all the fun stuff, you know, the action stuff together and all the cool technical things we got to do.
I was.
AI has a little bit of Pinocchio in it, and Teddy is the Jiminy Cricket to David's Pinocchio, you know. Obviously, toys will get a lot better in the future, and little kids like imagine that their toys are alive, and here you have a toy that's actually moving and alive, reacting and everything. A lot of intricate work going on with him, and that just makes him so alive. I mean, you just completely forget that he's a puppet. He's very heavy too. A lot of scenes I'm carrying him around, you know, running away from everything a lot, and you know, you have to carry this 20, 30-pound bear everywhere because he's got a lot of machinery inside him.
Let's not walk this way.
Working with Stan's fun. We had a lot of work with him going on in the months before shooting. We had a lot of pre-production things to do, getting life casts of my entire body, my feet, my hands, my chest, and my head and everything. The face cast was probably the weirdest because they put all this stuff on your face, and the only thing that's open to the air is your nostrils so that you can breathe. And I saw pictures of myself while I was under it, and it just looks like a mummy because like they put this whole cast and this glop all over your face and everything, and that was fun to do. They use the cast to make other me's, you know, dummies and everything. They match me completely. And when you have one of them in like a pose, you know, frozen, it actually looks like the real me, and it's pretty creepy. But the work with Stan is fun, you know, especially the table scene. We had the trick table for the part where they opened me up for the surgery. That made the movie more fun. It added another part to the movie.
You made a mess of yourself.
It's a futuristic movie, but we wanted to make it as close to home as possible. We didn't want to go into all the high-tech gadgets and everything, but we wanted to have the advancement of the future, of course, in the movie, but we also wanted to have the heart of the film in it and to still have it come to life for the audience and have it be as real as possible for them.
All right.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
And Steven was great at making that real for everyone.
I do love you. I have always loved you.
Once again, my customers may ask for me by name. Gigolo Joe, what do you know?
There was some evidence from Stanley's AI archives about Gigolo Joe, but not a lot of substance. And I was like an archaeologist going through every piece of paper trying to find out what did Stanley intend, what was the story he wanted to tell, because my job was to honor his story without forgetting about myself. I wanted to also be able to include my own sensibilities. But Gigolo Joe was an invention of Stanley's, but he never really fleshed him out, so to speak, or mech'd him out. So I had to invent a lot of Gigolo Joe's character, and one of the things I wanted him to be was a dancer.
I just take his hand.
Like he's a throwback to those old gigolos from the 1930s, you know, with tails, tuxedo and tails. He had everything but a cane and a top hat. I just envisioned him being elegant, and that was one of the things that attracted Jude Law, I think, to the part.
You deserved much better in your life. You deserve me. I first heard about AI actually just after the time that Stanley Kubrick's death was announced. And like many people, I was a huge Kubrick fan. I heard about this project that he had apparently been working on. I'd heard of the involvement of Steven Spielberg in that project. I'm taking those in, and then it's like, but it kind of came into my life when I was in Berlin working and coming to the end of a shoot there, and I just got a phone call one evening. It was my agent who said, look, there's a very, very important phone call you've got to take. Steven Spielberg wants to speak to you about his new project. He's just decided what he's going to do. Phone goes, I speak to Steven. He explained to me that he had just finished writing the screenplay for AI, that there was a part in it he wanted me to play. I flew to London that weekend to meet with him, and I sat with him and read through it. And I jumped on board very eagerly.
Yes, that's better. That's much better. Much better. Rather than that.
Oh, sorry. I think the joy of playing a mecha was that every day for me as an actor was a discovery. It was almost like I was inventing. I came to this point several times through the rehearsal process and then through the shooting process, which was, you know, the obvious question: how do you play a robot? What do you think about? How can you possibly set up a list of rules to live by or to act by? Well, in a way, every day and every moment created a new question. Okay, how does my robot, how does my mechanical apply itself to this question or to this problem?
Do you want me to swirl before we leave? I don't think so. I wouldn't swirl David here.
So I worked very closely for 3 months prior to starting filming with a British choreographer called Francesca Jane. The initial idea was Fred Astaire, just because of his grace. So I worked quite closely with her initially on very kind of classical ballroom type dancing and movement. And that moved very quickly on to movement that was slightly more influenced by Gene Kelly. But having said that, we also came up constantly with ideas that Joe should, if he could dance in one style, why can't he dance in another? And that was affected in sorts by the makeup, which started months and months before we started shooting. I think maybe at least 4 or 5 months before we started shooting, and was a long process involving Stan Winston, Steven and V. Neil. And initially I think the idea was to create a fake me with prosthetic molds that were applied covering my whole head with a wig that looked like my hair, but started to limit to a degree what I could do with my face. So they kind of opted for the alternative, which was rather than make a false me, it was to make me false. So V and Stan brilliantly came up with this makeup that would enable me to use my face naturally, but equally took away the kind of human kind of qualities of my looks. During that process, we flirted with the idea that Joe should be able to adapt his looks and his movement to attract any type of person that he chose.
They hate us, you know. The humans, they'll stop at nothing.
It was just a joy also to play someone who had, whilst he had such a huge journey, also had a very simple journey. It was a very pure journey. It was a journey of really recognizing trust and really recognizing that a friendship is more important than a function. You know, Joe's function is to fulfill his chip's needs. It's to keep going out and entertaining customers. But when it comes down to it, he chooses David over that. And that's why you must stay here with me. And that, for a robot, is a huge leap. Talk about a giant step for robot kind. It's actually breaking the function that you have been inbuilt. And it's almost as great as, you know, a slave suddenly realizing that he shouldn't be smashing rocks with his hammer, he should be smashing his manacles. It's like, it's a really powerful step.
And the shot after this is, as they bring you out, I'm going to get a shot over here like this.
I was just pleased to be a part of this gift that Steven is so good at offering his audiences and serving the part of Joe, really.
Okay, great.
End of Gigolo Joe.
End of Gigolo Joe.
Or is it?
Shakedown Shantytown.
That's a section where there are a huge variety of robots of various descriptions and builds that are running through the forest, scavenging for other parts. Maybe they've got an arm that's missing, so they're looking for broken robots so that they can retrieve parts. And we used every variety of type of effect to achieve these looks. We had human actors that wore blue, where we would replace parts of their face. The intention being that we would start to see mechanical underpinnings on real human actors. We had some that were puppeteered, that were fully puppeteered robots.
What do we do?
There are some that are fully computer graphics robots. There are some that are, you know, mix and match of everything. And so I think it's really interesting visually because lots of times you can't quite get a handle on exactly what you're looking at or how it's done.
Why is this happening?
Which is, after all, more fun anyway. So again, when we had an actor, for instance, that has to have a robot replacement, let's say, section of his or her face, we'd photograph the real actor in the lighting that was the scene. So that when we build that piece, we'll have the correct lighting and kind of the correct texture so that it'll fit in with the scene. But we didn't have that all the time, so sometimes all we have is a chrome ball to reflect what the lighting is, and we just kind of have to fake it after the fact. And so after we have all our designs of robot pieces, we put them in, and we most importantly have to abide by what's the density. Is it contrasty enough? Is it lit correctly? Is the shadowing correct? Those are the things that we look for.
But what does it amount to?
Another audacious shot that Steven wanted in this film involves what he calls the secretary robot, where William Hurt comes over and touches a couple of buttons on an actress. And he says, and I want her face to just open up, and so that William can reach in and pull out a cube that is her memory cube. And so instead of having a puppet, he didn't want a puppet of any sort. We're going through a fairly tedious method of recreating this woman's face, the actress's face, on kind of a form that is all built in a computer that will be her real skin and her real skin look, so it can open up and reveal the underlying robot mechanism. We did quite a lot of photographs from every angle of her face and all the possible positions where her forehead might be when it opens, where her lower part of her face would be when it opens, and taking all those pieces and literally applying them in a photographic sense onto a computer graphic model that can then animate.
He'd spent so much time thinking about that to sit down with a writer and start talking about what he wanted that writer to do, he began to realize it might be better if he just tried to do it himself.
I've done a lot of writing that I haven't taken credit for in the intervening years between Close Encounters, Poltergeist, and now. I haven't stopped writing. I don't sit down and do entire screenplays, but I do a lot of collaborative, the stuff that directors often do in close associations with certain writers. Don't do it all the time, but I've been very involved in writing, or at least in collaborating with writers on most of my directed films. So this wasn't unusual for me to write it, but the story was unusual and so personal to Stanley that I thought it would lose Stanley's personal ideals if I had to recommunicate his ideas through me to yet another party. And I just thought it would, you know, kind of preserve the purity of what Stanley wanted to achieve and the story he wanted to tell if I just bit the bullet and wrote it myself.
I read Steven's script and I was completely enthusiastic about it because he did one thing. He used the script as it was in principle without really changing it drastically, but he made hundreds of changes nevertheless and really improved it. And Stanley would have loved it. The film script that I read by Steven is very, very much in his spirit. That gave me great joy.
There were enormous challenges facing this project because this is a journey, and because it's a fairy tale, and because it takes place in the future. Nothing really exists, so everything had to be designed and fabricated and invented by Steven. And then the process of communicating that to all these different people in all these different departments is really what the challenge.
It's a very moving story about a future society where you just can't have children without getting a license from the government. Its circumstances have really changed. Technology has increased to an extent that most normal work is performed by robots. And in this society, we are confronted with the idea of programming a child robot so that he is able to love.
Ready?
This is a seed idea.
I propose that we build a robot who can love.
I'll catch you.
No, Mommy, please.
We run now. You're a machine.
I'm a boy. My name is Steven.
Well, my involvement in AI came about simply because my friend Stanley Kubrick told me a story that he was developing about artificial intelligence. And it was a story that was very close to his heart. For the first time in the 18 years I knew Stanley, he was taking me sort of into his creative confidence on a project. He never brought me into his confidence on Full Metal Jacket or on The Shining, but for some reason on AI, he felt that...
The challenge of producing is all about.
Very nice.
Fairy tale.
I love you.
Action, Francis. I swear I was a little simpatico to that subject. Stanley began talking to me about it in the mid-1980s. And in the mid-1990s, he actually called me again. We had talked many, many times during that those 10 years. And then one day he said, I think I have a great idea. I produce it, you direct it. And I kind of took me back. I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, and I said, what, you mean you want me to direct the movie you were going to direct? And he said, yeah, I'll produce it for you to direct.
While Stanley was alive, he said, this is actually a film that should be directed by Steven Spielberg. He appreciated Steven's different talent very, very much, and he saw all his films.
Steven installed a fax machine in his closet at home, and he and Stanley faxed each other directly. Any notes about the script, any comments, you know, nothing went through me, or there were no copies in the office. Steven basically served as his own assistant for this project, and Stanley was the exact same way.
We actually spent 2 months going over all of his storyboards, almost 1,000 storyboards he had already done on the film, and a 90-page treatment that he had supervised based on the short story Super Toys Last All Summer Long by Brian Aldiss, and then the screen story by Ian Watson, which Stanley had pretty much worked on with Ian.
Tell me, what is love?
It was a great opportunity, and I wouldn't have responded in the positive if I hadn't really thought it was one of the nicest stories I had ever heard. I mean, the story that Stanley told me was a beautiful, contemporary, albeit future fairy tale.
I like your floor.
And I thought it had a gentle heart, and it was also had extreme kind of, elasticity about the project. It went from the domestic, the gentle, a mother and a son, and the relationship between mothers and sons, to suddenly an odyssey, an adventure that takes you into the darkness of an unspecified future time when robots and man are at the brink of civil war. And then returns you to a dream, a wish that this robot child, David, makes at the very outset of our story.
Are you her?
And it was a story that I thought was a perfect story for Stanley. Stanley kept saying, this is the perfect story for you. We went back and forth like that until I finally just said, I think you should do it, Stanley, and I'll produce it for you if you'd like. And Stanley said, no, that's okay. If you don't want to direct it, I'll do it.
When Stanley passed away, his widow contacted Steven and basically said, this film will never see the light of day unless you make it. And it was just like a gift had fallen in Steven's lap.
And I said yes, first because it was a wonderful story, and second because it was a way for me to honor Stanley.
And we basically, from that point forward, any other project went on the back burner, and we were all about making artificial intelligence.
Got it, cut.
And cut, great.
He was attracted to it because it embodied many of the things that he had explored with, obviously, E.T. and Close Encounters. But I think this, in many, many ways, takes Steven several more steps, because Stanley Kubrick is bringing something to this project. And Steven wanted to embrace that and pay homage to that. And so he took Stanley's contribution and then added that to his own. Once he found out that this might be a project he would do, it was a project that he